In this demonstration, I'll configure a multifunction printing device over the network. The first thing you need to know to make a configuration over the network is the IP address of the printing device. Now you can learn of this by physically going to the printer where there will be a little touchscreen control panel normally where you can configure the printer that way. But from there, you'll be able to connect it to a network if it's not plugged into a wired network. And then from there you can also see its IP address if it was connected, let's say, to a wireless LAN. So I already know the IP address of this printer, so I'm going to go ahead and pop it into my web browser bar up at the top. And I'll press enter. Now the first thing that's alarming is that it let me into the printer without even being challenged with the password. That's one of the very first things that we're going to change. Now also, I've got a message here in my browser address bar at the top that says not secure, which means I don't have an HTTPS encrypted secured connection to this device because I didn't enter that in front of the IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and put HTTPS:// in front of the address and press enter. Now while I am making that encrypted connection, notice there's a line through HTTPS up in the address bar and it says not secure. If I click on that, I see the certificate is invalid, and if I click on it, it says at the top that the CA root certificate is not trusted by this web browser. So that's why it doesn't appear to be valid. And that's because this is a digital security certificate used for encryption that was issued to the printer by the printer. And therefore, my browser doesn't trust it. Now I could choose to import this on my computer so my browser trusts it, or we could even issue a certificate that we've generated within the organization or through a third-party certificate authority so that it would be trusted when we make future connections over HTTPS to the printer. But for now, I'll just accept that and I'll click OK. So here I've got my HP multifunction print device with an embedded web server in the firmware. That's why we're able to make this connection to this web page. And we can see some overall settings, such as the fact that scan to email appears to be configured. I have a general sense here of my estimated ink levels for each cartridge because this is an inkjet printer. However, I can also configure this by clicking on the specific boxes or panels on this main screen. For example, scan to email. If I want to add another email address, I can click directly on that item to go to the scan menu up at the top. And I can see current email addresses added, and I could also add a new one by clicking the new icon. I've also got fax options available if I want to be able to transmit documents through standard phone lines. Under web services, I'll see any web services configured here, such as HP ePrint, which allows devices like tablets and smartphones that don't even have a printer driver to be able to print to this device wirelessly. If I go under network, I've got a number of network settings. We can see a network summary for our wired network connection and wireless, but also I can configure those things over on the left. So for example, if I expand wireless 802.11, which is for my Wi-Fi connectivity, I can go through the wireless setup wizard. I can configure IPv4 specifically, IPv6. I've got advanced settings. So let's just take a look at the IPv4 configuration. Currently, my multifunction printing device is set to acquire an IP address and its settings automatically, but we could manually specify an IP address, a subnet mask, and a default gateway. The default gateway is required for connectivity to this multifunction printing device outside of this network. We've also got a number of other options here. For example, AirPrint. AirPrint is a technology used by Apple devices, so if I want to be able to print from an iPad or an iPod and so on. So we could edit the settings to configure this item. If I click Advanced Settings over on the left, here's where I can click on Certificates, and this would allow me to configure a printer certificate that is trusted by my web browser instead of using the default self-issued certificate. We've even got the Bonjour service listed over here. This is used in order to resolve things like service names to IP addresses on a network that doesn't currently use a DNS server for name resolution. We've also got port 9100 printing. This is called TCP port printing. Port 9100 is like a listening channel that many network printers will listen on for connectivity over the network to the printer to send print jobs to it. I'm going to click on Settings up at the top, where over on the left, I'm going to open up Security and click Password Settings. Now, we weren't prompted for a password because none is configured. So I'm going to go ahead and configure a password here, and I'll just confirm that same password. So try to use a strong password, and then down below, I'll click Apply. Now, strong passwords are at least 8 characters long, ideally have a mix of upper and lowercase letters, maybe numbers and symbols. So I now see that the changes have been updated successfully. So as I start configuring other items, so if I click back on Network, and if I start clicking on some items to configure them, notice I'm already being prompted here to authenticate. So the default username is admin with the password that I've just configured. So if I enter that in, it should let me in. And indeed, it does. The last thing we'll just take a quick look at here is the Tools section on this multifunction printing device. And again, depending on the device you have, will determine the settings that you see. So I can see, for example, my ink gauge over on the left, which gives me information about my ink cartridges. I've also got the option to back up the configuration of this printer to a file. If I click Backup, all the settings here have a check mark in them. I can specify password and confirm it, and then click Save to download a backup of the configuration of this device to a safe location. And in the event that I have to reset the printer, I can come back and restore all of the settings from that file.